Hey guys, tonight we are diving into one of the most stressful, yet weirdly calming logistics puzzles in human history. We are heading back to ancient Egypt about 3,500 years ago. But we are not here for the golden masks or the pharaoh drama. No, tonight, you are the one in charge of moving a single massive chunk of granite and obelisk. Yeah, just one. It is a job that takes monk-level patience and the back of a literal giant. And honestly, if you mess up the friction on the sand by even a tiny bit, you're probably not making it past day one under a few hundred tons of sun-baked rock. No pressure. Before we get into it, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you are actually enjoying this kind of thing. And I am curious, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your city and the current time down in the comments. It is always kind of cozy seeing people from all over the world tuning in at different hours, all settling in for a little history together. Alright, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into this. You're standing at the edge of a quarry in Aswan. It is 4 in the morning. The desert air is surprisingly cold. Sharp, almost biting. In front of you stretches a massive bed of pink granite, blending into the darkness like it is part of the night itself. Under your feet, there is no soft sand, just solid, ancient rock, compressed over millions of years. It is cold, unmoving, and somewhere inside that rock is your problem. You can see just the outline of it. A clean, carved shape, still attached to the earth. 30 meters long, hundreds of tons, an obelisk. Right now, it feels less like a monument and more like a giant that refuses to wake up, and your job is to pull it out of the ground in one perfect piece. No cracks, no mistakes. Easy, right? Here is the catch. Ancient Egyptians were incredibly picky about their stone. Aswan granite was the only acceptable material for obelisks, strong, beautiful, and extremely hard, which sounds great, until you realize you have to cut it without any steel tools. What you have instead is a heavy round stone called a diorite ball. It is even harder than granite, and your job is simple in theory. Pick it up and slam it down, over and over again. Around you, the sound is constant. Thud, thud. Hundreds of workers doing the exact same motion. It echoes through the early morning, like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Kind of hypnotic, actually. And here is something people usually get wrong. These workers were not the miserable slaves you see in movies. Most of them were skilled laborers. They were fed, housed, and even had medical care. There are records showing that if the quarry ran low on garlic and onions, yes, garlic, they would literally go on strike, because to them, without their food, they did not have the strength to do this job. You lift the diorite ball. It is heavier than you want it to be. You bring it down hard onto the groove that has already been started. A small puff of granite dust kicks up. That is it. That is all you get from one strike. You look at the trench. It is deep, but painfully slow to grow. Your job is to carve 4 of these trenches, all the way around the obelisk, until it is completely separated from the bedrock. Not in days, in months. Some of the workers nearby are wedging dry wooden pieces into the cracks. There is still debate today about how exactly this worked. The classic theory is that they poured water onto the wood, letting it expand and crack the stone from the inside. But with granite this dense, some historians are not fully convinced that would be enough. There is another idea, that they used heat, fire to expand the rock, then cold water to shock it, helping create clean fractures. You crouch down for a second and press your hand against the stone. Even before sunrise, it already feels like it is starting to hold warmth. You glance at the others, still working in silence. There is something strange about it. This kind of work forces you to slow down. There are no deadlines, no notifications, just impact after impact. Your hands are starting to ache. The skin between your thumb and finger is rough now. Calluses forming, the stone is leaving its mark on you. You look up toward the east. The outline of the Nile is just barely visible in the dim light. Somewhere beyond it, there are temples, palaces, a whole world full of movement. But out here, it is just you, the stone, and time. Your dollar bowl has already worn smoother from the constant use. And you know this is only the beginning, because the moment this massive piece finally breaks free, that is when things really start to get complicated. But for now, in this cool, quiet hour before sunrise, all you need to do is lift, drop, and lift again. And slowly, you start to feel the rhythm, almost like meditation. After a few weeks of hammering away in those trenches, to the point where you have basically named your dorite ball, you start to realize something. This job is not really about strength. It is about precision. What you are doing now is basically giving this unborn giant a full body spa. You are smoothing the surface of the obelisk carefully, patiently, almost reverently. You crouch on the partially shaped stone, watching the others. They are working in the steady, almost sacred rhythm, slowly shaving away every rough edge, every uneven ridge in the granite. Here's something important. Egyptian obelisks are not made of multiple pieces. They are single stones, monoliths, which means you do not get a second chance. If there is a hidden crack inside a stone, or if you hit it just a little too hard and it fractures, that is it. Months of work gone. That massive block, it gets downgraded, maybe turned into a temple threshold or some secondary structure, and you are left staring at what used to be your masterpiece. So yeah, you are walking on eggshells, even though technically you are standing on one of the hardest materials on earth. And then you notice something kind of brilliant. To check how flat the surface is, the Egyptians came up with this ridiculously simple but genius method. You grab 3 wooden rods and a tightly stretched string. 2 rods go on either side of the stone. The string runs between them, and the 3rd rod, you slide it underneath the string. If it gets stuck somewhere, that spot is too high. If there is too much space, that part is too low. That is it. 3 sticks and a string. And somehow, this method lets them achieve a level of precision that would still impress modern engineers. No machines, just patience and geometry. You shift your weight, knees pressing into the rough stone dust. Sweat drips down your face and disappears the second it hits the dry granite. At some point, you might think, why does it even need to be this perfect? It is going to be covered in carvings anyway. But the experienced workers will tell you something important. If the surface is not perfectly balanced, the obelisk will not stand straight. Its center of gravity will be off. And when you are dealing with something this tall, that is not a small problem. Historians are still debating something interesting here too. Did the Egyptians finish most of the fine polishing right here in the quarry? Or did they leave the final smoothing for later, after transportation? No one is completely sure, because the unfinished obelisk in Aswan shows both rough tool marks in some areas and incredibly smooth surfaces in others. It is like looking at a sketch that was never fully completed. You pick up a smaller polishing stone, dip it in water, and start grinding. The sound is different now. No more heavy thuds. It is softer, rough, a low, gritty, scraping sound. After a while, it almost does something to your mind. You start to feel like the stone is changing beneath your hands. Like it is softening, slowly turning into something almost workable. Like a giant block of pink clay, you watch tiny crystals in the granite catch the sunlight and sparkle, and it hits you. You're not just shaping a rock. You're making something meant to last forever. Off to the side, another group is working on the very top of the obelisk, the tip, the part they will eventually turn into the pyramid-shaped cap known as the benben. That piece will be coated in electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver. You imagine it for a second, standing tall in front of a temple. The first light of sunrise hitting that golden tip, flashing across the sky, and just for a moment, you forget how much your back hurts. You shift again, feeling the faint vibration in your fingertips. Out here, time feels frozen, but the stone, it is slowly becoming something. You are not just moving weight, a slow, deliberate ritual that gives this stone meaning. You watch sunlight glide across its surface, leaving streaks of gold behind, and you realize this kind of perfection does not come from one grand moment. It comes from thousands of people, like you, spending ordinary afternoons, refusing to give up on a single piece of stone. And then, finally, you reach the moment, the part where even the most demanding priest would have nothing left to complain about. All four sides of the obelisk are smooth, clean, perfect, which means it is time to separate this giant from the rock it has been part of for hundreds of millions of years. Right now, the obelisk feels like a precision-cut piece almost. Three sides are already free, but the bottom is still holding on. You step down into the narrow trench beneath it, barely wide enough for you to squeeze through sideways. The rock walls press in around you. It is tight, heavy. You can almost feel the weight above you, even without looking up. This is where things get serious. Here's the classic explanation. The Egyptians used something called the wooden wedge expansion method to finish the job. You and the others start carving a row of evenly spaced holes along the base of the obelisk. Every single one of them is carefully measured, lined up like teeth on a zipper. Then you take dry wooden wedges, fig wood, and gently hammer them into place. And here is a weird little detail. Those wedges have to be completely dry, like bone dry. The workers in charge of supplies would leave them out in the blazing sun for weeks, making sure there was not a hint of moisture left in them. Because what happens next depends on that. You grab a water jar, and slowly you start pouring. The cool Nile water seeps into the wood, and then, at first, it is subtle, a soft creaking sound. Then louder, creak, crack. The wood is swelling, expanding, pushing outward with quiet, relentless force. It feels like you have turned the earth itself into a slow, silent hydraulic press. You hold your breath. The ground beneath you trembles ever so slightly. Now, historians still argue about this part. Was the expansion of wood really enough to break a 30-meter granite connection? Some think maybe not. Some believe the Egyptians might have dug horizontal tunnels underneath, or used some kind of leverage system to help the process along. Because when archaeologists studied the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, they did not find the kind of clean wedge break patterns you would expect. So, the exact method, still up for debate. But for you, right now, there is only one thing that matters. That crack. You watch closely. And then, it happens. A dull, heavy sound. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. A deep, snapping thud, like metal giving way. And suddenly, it is free. That massive stone is no longer part of the earth. It is its own thing now. A few 100 tons of very real, very dangerous cargo. And maybe, at this point, you are thinking, okay, great, it is loose. Why not just push it out? Yeah. No, that is exactly how you do not survive day one. Because once something this heavy starts moving on its own, you are not stopping it. It will glide through that trench like ice and turn everything in its path into a memory, including you. So instead, you go slow, very slow, using massive wooden levers and carefully stacked stones. You begin to shift it, little by little, you will notice something else. 2. Workers are placing small, rounded stones underneath it. What they are doing is simple but brilliant. They are turning sliding friction into rolling friction, which makes all the difference. And then you see it. This enormous column, hundreds of tons, starting to move, slowly, painfully slowly, millimeter by millimeter. Voices rise around you, workers calling out in rhythm, coordinating every movement. And in that moment, you feel something, not fear, not even relief, something closer to awe, not awe of gods, awe of people, because you are standing here with no machines, no engines, no hydraulics, just water, wood, and a deep understanding of how the world works. And somehow, you just move the earth. You wipe the mud from your face. Look up, the top of the obelisk catches the sunlight, swaying ever so slightly, like it is saying goodbye to the ground it came from. Right now, it is like a newborn, still lying in the pit, but no longer bound to where it started, ready for the world. And your job now, is to make sure that when this thing starts rolling over, it does not take your toes with it. Because what comes next, that is where things really speed up, the journey ahead. Let us just say, this is where the real Fast and Furious begins, ancient Egypt edition. And then, finally, you see it. This massive obelisk, pried loose from the bedrock, lying on the surface, like a giant whale washed up on shore. At this point, you probably want to just collapse on the ground and take a long sip of cold beer. But reality hits you like a slap, because the real nightmare in front of you now is a long slope stretching from the quarry all the way down to the Nile. And it is covered in hot, shifting sand, unstable, unforgiving, and somehow you have to move a few hundred tons of stone across it. Here is how they do it. No wheels, no carts, just a sled. Yes, a wooden sled, the kind you would expect to see in the snow, not in the middle of a desert. You are now helping guide this massive wooden platform built from thick cedar beams. No axles, no rolling parts, just 2 wide runners sliding across the ground. And your job, get the obelisk onto it. Then you notice something strange. At the very front of the sled, there is a guy who looks like he is doing absolutely nothing. He is not pulling, he is not pushing, he is just standing there with a giant jar of water. And then you realize that is his entire job, to pour water onto the sand. Constantly now, you might be thinking, wait, pouring water on sand. In a desert, how does that help? Turns out, modern physics shows that when you add just the right amount of water, about 2 to 5%, the sand grains stick together just enough to become firmer, stronger, the surface gets harder, and the friction drops by almost half. It is basically ancient fluid mechanics in action. Historians are still arguing about one detail though. Was it really just water? Or did they mix in plant sap or oils to make it even more effective? Because in 40-degree heat, water evaporates fast. So keeping that perfect balance over a long distance, not exactly easy. Now you are in the pulling line. A thick rope made of papyrus fibers is wrapped around your shoulders. Your toes dig deep into the damp sand for grip. Someone at the front starts beating a wooden rhythm. And on cue, everyone pulls. At the same time, you feel the rope bite into your skin. Hard it burns. You can already tell it is going to leave a mark. But then you hear it. That first dry, heavy scraping sound. The sled moves slowly, but it moves. The vibration travels through the ground, up your legs, straight into your chest. It feels like you're pulling an entire mountain. And there is another detail you start to notice. to keep the sled from sinking into the soft sand. Workers ahead of you are laying down thick wooden planks, tracks, like an early version of railroad ties. The team behind you rushes to grab the planks that were just passed over, runs them ahead, and lays them down again. Over and over, it is like a relay race that never stops. Slow, exhausting, constant. At some point, you glance back. The obelisk is glowing under the sun, smooth, massive, almost unreal, and all of you, covered in sweat and dust, look like a line of ants dragging something far too big for them. And yet, there is something calming about it. The rhythm, the breathing, the sound of food pressing into sand. No one is complaining, no one is rushing. Everyone just moves together. In the distance, you can see the Nile getting closer. That river is your destination, but between you and it is a steep slope down to the riverbank. And here is the problem. If the sled loses control, that obelisk turns into a giant, unstoppable bowling ball. It will smash through everything, the dock, the workers, all of it, and disappear into the river. So now your grip tightens. You hold on to that rope, like your life depends on it. Because honestly, it kind of does. You are not just pulling anymore, you are preparing for the next phase, the downhill part. And out here, on this shifting sea of sand, that is where things really get intense. And then, finally, you smell it. That faint, damp scent in the air. The Nile. It carries a hint of mud, something alive, something different from the dry silence of the quarry. You have made it. But if you thought the hard part was over, this next step, it is basically a high-stakes game of Tetris only on a reinforced temporary dock. Under your feet, thick mud shifts slightly. With every step, in front of you sits the barge, and it is huge. This thing was built specifically for the obelisk. Made from tough Lebanese cedar, carefully fitted together, no queue like modern ships, just a complex internal structure holding everything in place. It sits in a narrow canal that was dug just for this moment, waiting, quiet, like it knows what is about to be placed on top of it, could break it. Here's how they actually do it. No cranes, no lifting. Those do not exist yet. Instead, you lock the barge in place, surround it with sand, pack it in until it is completely stable, like it is part of the ground itself. Then, you build a long, gentle ramp. And using that incline, you start pushing the obelisk, still on its sled slowly, into the ship. It is steady, controlled. That is the advantage. But here is the risk. If you remove the sand at the wrong moment, if the weight shifts unevenly, the entire ship, flip, and everything, months of work, goes straight to the bottom of the Nile. Now here is a detail that feels almost ridiculous, but it works. Before loading the obelisk, the engineers run a test. They fill the ship with rocks, same weight, same distribution, and they watch how deep the boat sinks into the water. Then, when the obelisk is loaded, they slowly remove the rocks, while letting water into the canal at the same time, balancing everything. Carefully, it is basically like playing with a rubber duck in a bathtub. Except, this duck weighs 300 tons, and if you mess it up, you, the duck, and the entire boat are all going to the bottom to meet Osiris. You crouch near the edge of the ship, watching the water slowly rise. It spills over the canal walls, inch by inch, and then you hear it. A low, strained creaking from beneath you, the wood. Under pressure, historians still argue about this part too. How did these ships not just snap in half? With something this long, this heavy, the middle should take the most stress. So why did it not break? Some believe the Egyptians used a system of tension ropes, stretched from bow to stern, almost like the cables on a modern suspension bridge, distributing the weight across the entire structure, keeping it from collapsing under its own burden. And now, your job is simple. Wait, you are watching the water level, because this is the Nile. And everything depends on the flood. Only during a few days each year, when the river rises to its highest point, can a fully loaded barge like this pass over the shallow parts of the riverbed. So you wait, day after day, watching the water rise, just a little more each time, a few inches, then a few more, and yeah, at some point, you might think, why not just use smaller boats? But that is not an option. The obelisk is too long, too fragile, under uneven pressure. One mistake, and it cracks, so you wait. With it, while you wait, the workers wrap the obelisk in thick, wet papyrus mats, layer after layer, partly to protect it from the sun, so it does not expand and crack, but also to protect the polished edges during transport. And as you look at it now, covered, massive, it feels like you are guarding something sacred, like a sleeping god. And then, one night under a full moon, it happens. The water reaches the final mark. The priest steps forward, raises a horn, and blows. The sound cuts through the night, clear. Final, workers move quickly, cutting the last ropes holding the ship in place. And then you feel it, that massive weight, hundreds of tons. Shift just slightly, the barge lifts gently. Rocking for the first time, it is floating. You climb onto the front of the ship, gripping the railing beneath your feet. The deck begins to move, rising and falling with the rhythm of the Nile. You are part of the river now. And just like that, you are moving, drifting downstream. Your destination, Thebes, the city of gods. Right now, you are standing at the very front of a massive barge. The wind coming off the Nile brushes past you, cool, damp, carrying this strange mix of rotting reeds and distant spices. It is probably the most peaceful moment you have had on this entire journey. Behind you, the obelisk sits wrapped like a giant mummy, perfectly still, immense, pressing the ship so deep into the water that the surface is just inches below your feet. You look around. On both sides of the river, green fields of papyrus and farmland stretch out like a slow-moving painting. And you are not walking through it, you are floating through it. On a moving island, made of wood and stone. Here is something important. Nile, travel follows nature's rules. Downstream for going. Wind assisted for returning. So on this leg of the journey, you barely have to row at all. Your barge is surrounded by smaller escort boats. They are not there to push it forward. They are there to guide it, steering it gently through narrow channels, making sure this massive floating structure does not drift into the riverbanks or get stuck in shallow mud. And then there is something a little strange. Ancient Egyptian sailors were deeply superstitious, especially when it came to sacred cargo, like in Obelisk. They hang linen cloths soaked in holy water around the ship, and at the front there is even a priest holding a cat. Yes, a cat. You might be thinking, okay, how exactly does a cat help us not crash into the riverbank? But in their belief system, cats are connected to the goddess Bastet. They were thought to sense danger in the water, like hidden sandbanks or spirits beneath the surface. And there is another detail that feels almost absurd today. Beer. Lots of it. The crew drinks this thick, almost porridge, like ancient Egyptian beer. It is not exactly refreshing by modern standards. But it does the job, keeps everyone calm, loose, slightly amused. Which, honestly, is probably necessary in the size of a building. You lean back against the base of the obelisk. The wooden deck beneath you vibrates ever so slightly. Barely noticeable, but constant, like the river itself is breathing under you. Historians still argue about this part. How did these wooden ships survive carrying this much weight without iron nails, without modern fasteners? Some believe the Egyptians used what we would now call flexible structural design. Instead of resisting force rigidly, the ship flexed with it, like a woven basket under pressure, distributing stress instead of breaking under it. A kind of engineering philosophy that feels way ahead of its time. Soft connections, controlled flexibility, strength through adaptation, not rigidity. And then you notice something else. The busiest people on board are not the sailors. It is the workers constantly pouring water over the obelisk. At first, it feels unnecessary. You are already on a river. Why add more water? But it turns out there is a reason. Temperature difference. The sun heats the top of the stone during the day, while the bottom stays cool and shaded inside the ship. That imbalance creates internal stress, and over time, it could literally crack the stone in half. So they keep it wet, constantly, cooling it down like it is a living thing with a fever. As night falls, the convoy pulls in to rest. The ship's anchor along the riverbank. Everything slows. You lie down on the deck. Above you, the sky is almost unreal. A full spread of stars, stretching endlessly across the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, you hear hyenas calling out across the desert. But right beside you, there is only the soft sound of water tapping against wood. The obelisk rises above you in silhouette, silent, pointing upward like a giant stone needle aimed at the sky. And for a moment, you are not just a laborer anymore, not just part of a crew. You feel something bigger, like you are part of a system, a purpose, something almost sacred. But that peace does not last forever, because you know what is coming next. Every mile downstream part, unloading it, the temples of Thebes are already visible on the horizon. Faint silhouettes of towers rising from the land of gods. Going downstream was easy, almost effortless. But getting that stone back onto land, that is a completely different story. That is where gravity stops being a background force and becomes your enemy. You finish the last bit of beer at the bottom of your bowl. Thick, grainy, and you look up at the sky one more time. The river flows beneath you. The stars stay still above you. And somewhere in between, you take a deep breath of cool night air, knowing the real challenge is still ahead. When your barge slowly drifts toward the massive stone dock of Thebes, something in you tightens instantly, because unloading. It is not just backing up and unloading. Not even close. The Nile is already starting to drop, very slowly, but steadily. And that changes everything. If you do not get this obelisk onto solid ground before the water retreats, the ship will get stuck in the mud, or worse, the uneven pressure could snap it in half. You stand on the slick wooden deck. Ahead of you, thousands of workers are already waiting on shore. It looks less like a construction site and more like a battlefield that never needed weapons. Here's the key idea. Ancient Egyptians used almost the same method for unloading as they did for loading. They called it the backfill method. You build a massive ramp between the ship and the dock, carefully compacted into a stable incline. Then you dismantle the front barrier of the ship, and very slowly you let gravity take over. The obelisk begins to slide, just a little at first, then more, always controlled, always measured. But here is the terrifying part. If even one rope snaps, if the timing is off by a few seconds, this entire thing turns into an uncontrollable battering ram. And everything on the shore gets destroyed. And then comes one of those strange ancient details to reduce friction and absorb vibration. They place thick leather soaked in sesame oil between the sled and the track. Yes, sesame oil, ancient engineering lubrication. Expensive, but incredibly effective. The leather softens the movement, reduces shocks, and keeps the stone from cracking under pressure. And it does not stop there. The entire crowd has to move in perfect rhythm. To coordinate thousands of workers, commanders stand on raised platforms, waving bright linen flags, and drummers keep the pace. You are standing right next to them. Each beat of the drum hits your chest like a pulse. Boom, boom, boom. And thousands of feet move as one. You watch the obelisk inch forward, centimeter by centimeter, grinding slowly up the ramp. Historians still debate one thing. The soil here in Thebes is soft river sediment. So how did they build a ramp strong enough to hold hundreds of tons without collapsing? Some researchers believe they reinforced it internally with crisscrossed palm trunks. Like a primitive version of reinforced earth construction. A hidden skeleton inside the sand itself. You notice something subtle too. The obelisk is not moving completely flat. It is tilted slightly. That angle is intentional. It helps distribute force. It also prepares the stone for the next stage, the most dangerous one of all, standing it upright. And then, bit by bit, the obelisk leaves the ship behind, until finally it rests fully on land, right in front of the temple. You are covered in mud, oil stains on your clothes, dust in your eyelashes, completely exhausted. And yet, when you see the barge finally float freely again, as if it can finally breathe, you feel like jumping straight into the river, just to celebrate. But the priest does not let you rest, not yet. He points toward 2 deep pits already dug in front of the temple gate, and you realize this is only the beginning, because moving it horizontally was one thing, but standing it up, perfectly vertical, without cracking the golden tip, without modern cranes, without steel cables, that is not construction anymore. That is physics defiance. You wipe the sweat from your face, look up at the massive stone lying on the ground, as if it is watching you, waiting, almost mocking how small you are. You take a deep breath and walk toward the sand-filled pits, where the next impossible step is about to begin. You are standing on what they call the city of the hourglass. A massive earthen platform, carved and built up over months of labor. Below you is a steep, carefully shaped slope, and at the very end of it, a deep vertical pit, its walls reinforced with massive stone blocks. This is the part that even modern engineers would pause at, the sand pit erection method. Right now, the obelisk is leaning against the edge of the sand ramp. It looks almost alive, like a diver posing at the edge of a pool, waiting for the right moment to drop in. And you are the one controlling that moment. Here is the core idea. The Egyptians are not forcing the stone upright. They are letting sand do the work. The obelisk is carefully slid into position above a funnel, shaped pit filled with dry sand. Perfectly dry, perfectly loose. Then comes the critical moment. Workers open a gate, and the sand begins to flow out, slowly, like an hourglass turning over. As the sand drains away, the support beneath the stone disappears bit by bit, and gravity takes over, not violently, not suddenly, but with terrifying patience. The base of the obelisk begins to sink and pivot naturally, guided downward by nothing but physics itself, until it settles onto a prepared foundation stone below. And here is something strange but real. that sand has to be perfect. Before use, it is sifted repeatedly, dried under heat, broken down until every grain is loose and uniform, almost like tiny polished beads. If even a small clump forms, or a single damp patch is missed, the whole system can jam, and hundreds of tons of stone can get stuck halfway through its rotation. So yes, they even treat the sand like precision equipment. There is even a ritualistic detail. Some foremen reportedly sprinkled dried scarab powder into the pit, not because it changed anything physically, but because belief matters when you are dealing with something this large and this dangerous. You crouch near the edge of the pit, watching closely. The ground beneath you is vibrating in slow, heavy pulses. Historians still argue about this stage too. How does a stone this massive survive the shift from horizontal to vertical without snapping under its own weight? Some believe the base stone had carved guiding grooves, like a mechanical hinge built into rock. Others suggest cushioning layers of thick linen and oil beneath the base, softening the final impact, so the stone lands not like a crash, but like something being gently set down. Then comes the final phase, as the sand drains away completely, and the obelisk nears full vertical alignment. The entire site goes silent. No shouting, no chanting, no drums, just wind and breath. The only sound now is the tension of ropes, massive stay lines pulled tight by hundreds of workers. Fine adjustments, millimeter by millimeter control. You grip one of the ropes, your hand shakes slightly, and you feel it. The stone is not just moving, it feels like something alive, a giant slowly waking up and straightening its spine. And then it happens. The base of the obelisk meets the foundation stone. Thud, a deep, resonant impact. Not just sound, a vibration that runs through the earth itself. For a moment, everything freezes. And then you look up. What was once lying flat on the ground? A single vertical line of stone piercing the sky. Even though it is still covered in dust, even though scaffolding still surrounds it, even though it is clearly man-made, it feels impossible. You sit down on the edge of the sandpit, completely drained. Half the pit is already empty now, a hollow space where something massive used to be held down, and you realize something. This was not just engineering, it was negotiation with gravity. You reach into your pocket. There is only a small, hardened piece of bread left. You take a bite, still staring upward, at the stone that now stands where chaos used to be. And in the back of your mind, you already know. This is not the end, because now comes the final task, climbing up across that smooth, towering surface, to carve the last thing this monument will ever carry, the agreement between a pharaoh. You are now standing on a swaying scaffold, made of bundled reeds and cedar wood. It creaks softly beneath your weight, high enough that you can see the entire city of Thebes stretched out below you. The wind up here is sharper, more restless. It cuts through your soaked indigo tunic, already heavy with sweat and stone dust. In front of you stands the obelisk, fully upright now, stable, silent. But in your eyes, it is still just a giant stone pillar waiting to be given a voice. Your job is to carve that voice, to turn blank granite into something that will outlive everyone standing here. Here's something important. Most of the inscriptions on obelisks were actually completed after they were erected. Not before. Workers like you stood on scaffolding like this, adjusting carvings in real time, not just for precision, but to match the way sunlight would later hit the surface. You grip a piece of quartz sandstone, dip it lightly in water, and begin to grind into the stone. Slowly, carefully. The sound of it changes everything. Up here, it is not loud, it is intimate, like a private conversation between you and the stone. And here is a strange detail Egyptian sculptors use makeup. Not for beauty, for survival. A mixture of coal or crushed lapis. Lazuli was applied around the eyes. Dark pigment, cutting the glare of the sun bouncing off the stone. You can feel it on your face now. Smudged black lines around your eyes, making you look half exhausted, half ritualistic, like someone who has not slept in days and is still working anyway. And then there is another tool you rely on, a hollow reed tube. Every few moments, you blow through it, clearing fine stone, dust from the carvings. Without it, the dust builds up, and one wrong movement can scratch a permanent flaw into the surface. Something that cannot be erased. Below you, the priests are preparing the final stage, the gilding of the top. Historians still argue about this part. Was the golden tip made from thin sheets of gold leaf, or a solid cap of electrum? Because if it was solid, its weight could slightly shift the balance of the entire monument. And that changes everything about how it stands. You watch copper brushes moving carefully along the lower carvings. Red mineral paste being prepared for sealing the stone. Everything is precise. Everything is deliberate. And then you notice something small, almost hidden. Between the official inscriptions, there are tiny marks, almost invisible. Personal signatures, secret prayers, small traces of the workers who were not supposed to exist in the final record. Technically forbidden, but still there. You run your fingers over one of them. A mark only you and the stone will ever know. The sun begins to set, and the Nile catches the light like molten copper. The shadow of the obelisk stretches across the temple courtyard, long, slow, almost alive. From up here, you watch it reach the far gate, touching the base of the temple like a hand stretching across time. And for a moment, it stops feeling like stone. It feels like a bridge. Between earth and sky, between labor and eternity, you put your tools away. The stone is warm now under your palm. You rest your hand on it. But as someone saying goodbye tomorrow, the scaffolding will be taken down, and you will never stand this close again. So you stay there a moment longer, listening to the wind, feeling the structure sway gently beneath you, and then you begin your descent, back toward the world of firelight, beer, and human noise, before night fully covers Thebes. When you finally climb down the last stretch of the creaking wooden scaffolding, stepping into the dimming edge of dusk, something unexpected happens. The moment your feet touch solid ground again, it feels unfamiliar, almost strange, as if your body had forgotten what stillness even was. Behind you, the 30-meter pink granite obelisk has fully merged into the night. Only its gold-covered tip remains visible. It catches a last thin line of light from beyond the horizon, like a star that refuses to fall. Here is something important. In ancient Egyptian, obelisks were called tegen. It meant something like protection or a ray piercing the sky. They were usually built in pairs, standing on both sides of a temple gate, guarding it, balanced, perfectly symmetrical, and that symmetry mattered, because to the Egyptians, symmetry was not just design. It was cosmic order, a reflection of how the universe should behave. You look at the single obelisk in front of you now, and you know its twin will stand opposite it tomorrow. Same weight, same shape, same silence. And here is a strange detail. Even after everything you have done, you will not be allowed to attend the final ceremony. That is how the system works. Workers and engineers like you are kept outside the temple gates, hidden in the reeds, listening from a distance, drinking cheap beer while horns sound from within, and yet some of them still make something to remember it by. Archaeologists have found small stone models of obelisks in worker settlements, miniature versions, private offerings. I helped build that. I was part of this. You lean against the shadow of the temple wall. The moon is rising now, cold and steady. And here is something historians still argue about. Why were these massive stones built at all? Was it religion? Was it engineering? Was it power? Or just pure royal ego carved into stone? Some say obelisks were giant sundials, tracking time through shadows. Others say they were political statements, proof that human will could dominate physics itself. But for you, the answer is simpler. It is in your hands, still shaking, still sore, still real. It is the feeling of having pushed against gravity and not being crushed by it. At night, the temple becomes silent, completely still. But the stone is not. Granite holds heat, so the obelisk slowly releases the warmth it absorbed during the day, back into the night air. If you were to press your ear against its base, you might hear it. Soft pops, the stone cooling, shrinking, breathing in its own way. That is its only language now, and it will speak for thousands of years. You look up one last time, at the silent giant you helped bring into the world. You know what will happen next. Empires will change. Languages will fade. Rivers will shift their paths. Romans will arrive. Steel and ships will come. And they will still stand in front of the stone and wonder how it was ever done. And they will not find an easy answer, because there is none. You tighten your linen wrap around your shoulders, turn away from the monument, and walk toward the glow of distant fires. Your part is finished, from the cold bedrock of Aswan to the shifting waters of the Nile to this golden temple courtyard. You carried something impossible all the way here, and now it stands without you. So let the world be quiet again. Let the river keep flowing in your mind, slow, steady, unstoppable, because right now you are not holding ropes anymore. You are not measuring sand. You are not lifting stone. You are safe. Your bed becomes a cedar barge. Your breath becomes a river current. The weight is gone. The work is done, just like the obelisk standing beneath the night sky. You are still here, quiet, steady, at rest. Let the night carry you forward, and sleep well.